It is Monday, and it is time for medical malfunction. This is going to be a little quickie, but we officially launched over the weekend, and so time to start talking about the news of the day. So we'll take just a moment here. Something's been making the rounds on all the socials and on your TV if you have that. Does anybody have that anymore? I don't know. Maybe you caught my appearance on the podcast of Sibling Revel. It's hard for me to say. Someday we'll get to the dental stuff, and it won't be long from now because, it's such a delight to deal with this speech of mine, even though people say it is a little bit cute, but it's also a little bit of a challenge, and it's quite the outcome from cancer treatments, by the way. So I know you're going to get sick of cancer this week. I'm sick of it all the time, but we're going to talk about it for just a second because it brought up a good question. Have you noticed Rob Lowe making the rounds in a new commercial about clinical trials? Clinical trials. Those are big. People always seem to think, wow, oh, if anything ever happens, my doctor can fix it. Oh, if anything ever happens, I'll just get desperate enough and get into a clinical trial or something like that. There'll be something about it. What struck me about the Rob Lowe thing was that he is so well known for having this body is a temple kind of mentality. And with clinical trials, you're really taking your chances. I mean, most people have basic questions like, if I get into a clinical trial, is there a possibility I'll just get a placebo and I won't get any treatment? Well, generally speaking, that's not true. I mean, there are lots of different types of clinical trials out there. Some of them are for treatment. Some of them are to test new things. Some of them are I watched Dirty Work over the weekend with Norm Macdonald. The brownie scene, all the side effects. One person eats one little bite, Norm, and then and Artie eats like all the stuff, and then he's got like nothing. He's got a little itch and nothing else. So there's a reason for clinical trials. We're all individuals. So imagine my surprise though when I saw Rob Lowe pimping for Lily. Pimping for Lily. We talked a bit over the weekend about some of my background. I'm not an in front of the camera person. So, but I have placed lots of people in front of the camera and all of the scripting and all of that. And I've certainly worked in healthcare a lot. So it kind of was the perfect storm, but it really made me think. I've read Rob's book. I know he's Mr. Family Man. So I thought, wow, this man who is so focused on Atkins and taking. I mean, clearly he's a vampire, right? He hasn't aged a day since The Outsiders was his premiere film. He's quite the miracle of aging or anti-aging. That's what people really want to know. What clinical trial can I get into for that, right? So it made me wonder, why was he pushing for this? And he's got a story. We all have these stories, right? There's a medical malfunction somewhere. I just had to find it. It wasn't hard to find. No, if you look. So let's look at that for just a second. He talks about it here. If you don't see this part in the commercial, but it also, talks about how he's paid. And, if it's big pharma, you're going to be paid well. So, but there was a reason too. He's got some motivation. So let's look at it for a second.
I was 10 years old, sitting in a room just like this when I first heard about my grandma Mim's cancer. I didn't really understand, but I knew a quiet way that people were looking at each other, that the news was not good. But then she entered a clinical trial, and we had hope. Those two words made all the difference for Mim. And maybe they can for you too.
Okay, paid sponsorship. Of course, it's paid. It's got to be paid. Everything, I mean, you might do this out of the goodness of your heart, but clinical trials, they bring up a lot of questions for people. And I touched on a few of them. But the fact of the matter is, they're a very complex kind of thing. And if you want to learn more about, say you're at a specific institution and you want to know about their clinical trial policy, well, institutions have their own review boards for clinical trials, so they have to pass that. Of course, people know about the FDA and what they may or may not be up to when it comes to clinical trials. But clinical trials also depend on the cooperation and compliance of the patients too. If patients are not honest or don't follow the rules, whole clinical trials have to be shelved or thrown into the garbage because they didn't follow whatever the protocol were as written. You have to be very specific and follow every rule. So lots of things have never made it through testing and approval because of patient noncompliance, by the way. So yes, you've got big pharma. Yes, you've got little pharma. Yes, you've got innovations in medicine. Yes, we have a very slow process. Yes, there are differences in how European manufacturers and approvals happen versus how it happens in America. But like I said, it's just always a little bit surprising to see someone come out and push for it. People have these ideas about clinical trials and what they can and can't do and how they operate and what they cost. And I don't mean to participate, I mean to produce them and put them on. They can be very expensive because, again, you have to file, you have to get approval, you have to, set all the rules, and then you have to recruit, and everything is very, that's where equity comes into. I know equity is not everyone's favorite word right now, but that's very tricky, to make sure you hit all of your potential patient audiences who might ultimately be using the medication or the protocol or the treatment, whatever it is. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's a big investment there. Let me just succinctly put it that way. There's a big investment by companies like Lilly, for instance, and I only point Lilly out because that's who we're looking at. And I only went there because I know that Rob Lowe is so clearly, he's passionate. Clearly, this is sincere. He has his own medical malfunction story in his family. And so he made this decision, but he also got paid, and that's fair. You should, not work for free. If you're an actor and you're doing something like this, that's fine too. So don't really have much issue with that. But the fact that it's making the rounds and it's so prevalent tells me that there's a change in thinking about how people are feeling about, the pharmaceutical industry and things like that. And we know that that's true. But there are ways to look into the specific clinical trials that are available, either through your institution, through your provider, and online. So we'll start there. Couple quick ones. There are registries for clinical trials and what's available, of course, based on condition and criteria and all of those things. You can find out about that and then take that to your provider and see if your provider is able to, because if your provider is not offering a clinical trial, by the way, there is a chance your provider can get approved to participate in a clinical trial that you want to be a part of. So even if they're not actively participating in it, that is one way to go about it. Like, say you're in an area that doesn't have access to a big very active academic medical institution, for instance, something like that. So there are ways to get into trials even if you're out in the middle of nowhere, maybe. But it is very, very much on you, whether it's your child, whoever is participating, to be part of the protocol and follow all of the rules as given to you, because you put everyone else at risk too. If you fall down and you don't, if you aren't forthcoming about it. So as patients, we have a responsibility, just like the pharmaceutical industries and the people doing the governmental roles in clinical trials and the physicians who oversee the clinical trial. There's all kinds of things to be considered. There's also, in these days of telehealth, sometimes you can do clinical trials remotely. You might have to go for certain types of in-person visits, but some of them you can do remotely. So that has made access to clinical trials a lot better for patients who, can't travel or don't live near, big, nicely funded institutions. Reimbursement. I kind of made the joke about dirty work, right? If you've never seen the movie, I'm not saying watch it. It's just a funny old classic comedy. But they're testing brownies that have, I don't even know what's supposed to be in it, but the brownies have side effects for some reason. And those types of things, there's often compensation aside from just maybe the care. A lot of times it's just for the care, but they can also sometimes pay mileage. They can pay different things like that. I'm sure you've heard about, places where you can, like, this is just like donating blood, for instance. Sometimes if you're a healthy candidate, that's what they're looking for, to test certain things on, and that's a possibility there too. So there are lots of things that go into clinical trials, but this one just sort of raised my eyebrow a little bit. I can't do that. I'm just happy I have eyebrows. The hair's coming along, but that is something to think about when it comes to clinical trials. There's a lot you can look into. Um, it's not as simple as you think, and there is a responsibility on all sides when it comes to participating in clinical trials and whether or not they proceed or get approved. And then, yeah, of course, everybody knows a lot of the stories about how, hey, why didn't they find that during the clinical trial? Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Maybe they tested it correctly. Maybe there was more that needed to be done. But the short answer here is, there are, governmental websites, there are condition websites, there are ask your provider, while you're in your visit, whether, if they're not participating, maybe find out if there's something available. And it doesn't always require the onus of travel. And even if it does, sometimes that's covered. So keep that in mind. And they're not all for like as serious as things as cancer. Sometimes there's for fun stuff like, I don't even want to say, I'll just say, we're going to get to that dating stuff, but there are some like that too that cover different treatments and um, extenders. I don't know. We can talk about that at another time, but that's a basic thing to talk about when it comes to clinical trials. So just something to get you thinking. And it certainly got my attention to see Rob Lowe. I was like, one of a clinical trial he did. He didn't. I wasn't shocked to hear that either, but he does have a reason, just like we all do. We all have people that we care about that have been affected by medical malfunction. So here we go. So it's time to go out there, get some good medicine, and give some good medicine. Thanks so much for being here.